Freedom. Let's go deep into this topic.
Sure.
So at the beginning, we talked that there's truth and freedom. Those are absolutely key components of this. How else does freedom play out? I want to start with a
Sure.
quote of yours,
Yes. Here we
again
go.
from
Here
the
we go.
book. Oh, this one's great. So people that are really paying attention are going to realize you said twice that there's only one path. We'll let that slide. But this, you said, the only path to true happiness is minimal government intervention into our lives and our bank accounts. Now, maybe said a little tongue in cheek, but I believe that. So, how far do you take that?
The genesis of where that sentence came from was at the time. Well, at the time, but now that you brought it up, I can trigger that same anger and indignation at the fact that in Quebec, I write a book based on my neuronal firings. It's not I bought this for $1 and I sold it for two. And I'm not denigrating
Right.
commerce, but there's nothing more personal than the financial rewards of your thoughts. That's why, by the way, in Ireland, they don't tax book royalties.
Really?
Yeah, yeah,
Whoa.
yeah. And I think also some art, like artistic endeavors.
Wow.
Okay.
That's really
So,
interesting.
so I write a book. It sells really, really well. That's very different than my professor's salary, which I've become accustomed and habituated to paying 50+% of my income in
Youch.
taxes.
Youch.
But now I already given you from my professor's salary more taxes than 99% of Canadians. Now I went off here in a different, the country of where the publisher is in the United States. It's not even in your territory. I'm telling you about my horrific story in the Lebanese civil war, and I'm telling you about my nomological networks, and I'm telling you about my satire and my stories and my words and my neuronal firings. You sit with, can I have this pen for a second?
Please.
As a prop. You sit in some magic government place and go, that Jew, he's so smart. 58% of his royalties come to me. So I have 42% of my personhood that's mine. 42% of my neuronal firings belong to me. That seems excessive, right? In 1917 was the first time that the Canadian government levied income tax temporarily.
It's a
106
long
years later,
temporary.
we're still under the temp. And what started at, I don't know what the original number was. For a few people, 5% tax grows to 7%, to 12%, to 19%, to 27%, to 56%. Where does it end? Now let's put it another way. Here's a powerful way to look at it. A slave from January 1st to December 31st works for you. You own him. Okay. The Canadian and Quebec government own me till August.
Jesus.
So from January to August, I don't work for myself. I'm not a free individual, including my thoughts, including my writings. Starting in August, I'm allowed to keep my money. That's not a healthy way to live. Now, of course, it's always couched under, but it's for the greater good. You know, these asshole, wealthy, successful people should pay their fair share. Well, okay, what's my fair share? What's the final number? Is it 90%? Is it 97%? So that's the genesis of that line, is that you can't have individual dignity in a socialist utopia. Because as E.O. Wilson said, Tom, when asked about socialism and communism, E.O. Wilson was a specialist on social ants. He's an entomologist who studied social ants. Social ants are all equal with the exception of the reproductive queen. So when asked about socialism and communism, he said, great idea, wrong species. Okay? We're not social ants. I did something that you didn't do. I worked hard. I made choices. I deserve to make more money than you. You don't get Big Boss saying, well, asshole, I'm going to take your money to spread gender ideology in Pakistan. But that's being taken from my royalties, book royalties. Justin Trudeau gets to spend $65,000 a day on some trip because it's my royalties that are paying for him. That's not fair.
Okay, so let's look at the common good though, because I imagine that you do want to be in a place where people are thriving. You don't want to be in a place where the masses are just rioting in the streets because they have
100%.
nothing. So, how do we get that balance right?
Fixed fee for everyone in the society. I'd even say fixed percentage. So I think that 25% flat fee is actually immoral. Right? When you and I go, I don't know your exact financial situation, but I know that you're a lot wealthier than I am. When we go to a restaurant, they don't say, "Oh, Tom, the burger is $14. Gad, let me see your income tax. Gad is $6. Joe, it's $3." So if we don't price discriminate there, why is it that for the privilege of living in an orderly society, I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, whereas I think it's 40 or 50% of Canadians don't pay income tax? So it really is like this Ponzi parasitic scheme where there is a few people that we constantly go and say, come on, give it up because for the common good. No, because I'm the sucker who's paying for common good. So, for example, in Canada, we have free healthcare. Well, it's free healthcare other than the fact that I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for that free healthcare. It's free healthcare for you. It's not free healthcare for me. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So, there is nothing philosophically moral about such a society. So let's just decide what that money is. Is it 10,000 per individual? Is it 5,000? Is it 30,000? We pay it and then you F off.
Okay, so uh, what is the barometer that you use? Is it morality? Is it something other than morality? So that I know how to approach the problem.
So let's answer it the other way. Usually the justification for why you should have a punitive progressive taxation. Progressive means that as you make more money, you pay more and more. It
I'm
accelerates.
sadly very
Aware of it. Exactly.
progressive tax.
So that argument stems from exactly one of the things that I talk about in the parasitic mind, which is the uh, confusing of equality of opportunities with equality of outcomes. So the socialist communist ethos operates under the following premise. If there are individual differences in the outcome between people, there must be at the root of that an injustice. And us beneficent people, magnanimous people called the government, have to fix that problem by redistributing that money. No, the reason why I make more money than you is because I may have more talent than you. It's because Elon Musk did not steal his money. He did not rob people. He did a certain set of things that brought that money to him. He deserves it. He already pays more taxes than 99% of people combined, right? But then someone will come along on TV and say, he should be taxed more. It's not fair that he makes this money. So it's not fair that if I write a book that sells well, I get to keep. By the way, I calculated, Tom, just listen to this, that I would have to work an extra 15 years as a professor in order to make up the money that was taken from my book royalties. Is that fair?
Wolf.
What's fair about that? Well, it's fair to the person who hasn't worked for 4 generations, who thinks that the socialist welfare nanny state is a wonderful thing, right? But it isn't fair to the people who support the Ponzi scheme. We're the ones who are getting gang raped all day long financially. And so I stand by that line. I think I was too soft when I said that line.
Okay, let's keep going. So you benefit from this society. You, I think, want other people to benefit from this
Yes.
society. If they were to adopt the tax strategy that you're saying, which is everybody just pays whatever that set fee is.
Yes.
Obviously, for some people, that could be 50%, 80% of their take home. And if they lower the taxes enough that it's a much, much smaller number so that it's, not an insane amount for anybody, they won't have enough to run the government programs. You go into austerity. Austerity tends to lead to riots.
Although I don't think that premise is true. I mean, I can't definitively state, but there have been studies that have shown, I mean, I could be misquoting the numbers,
Sure.
but the general gist applies. You can get rid of, say, 20% of federal employees as a first pass, and not a single quality of the deliverable service would be noticeable, right? So the bloat exists because you are not accountable to that governmental excess, right? Think of it another way. If you, Tom, make a certain set of decisions that result in you becoming financially destitute, you have to file bankruptcy. And there are real consequences to each of us at the atomized level, having had poor financial discipline. If the government does it, there are no consequences, right? So you just print more money. So inflation goes up, but I win maybe the next election. So there has to be, I don't usually like to talk in these kind of grand ways, but there has to be a rethinking of this whole system. Because look, here's what's going to happen. If I can, I would desperately want to leave Quebec. Is that a net benefit for Quebec? Well, it might be for those who hate the fact that I made fun of the French Canadian accent.
Right.
But if Gad leaves and Joe leaves and John, the brain drain, is that a net benefit for the society? Well, probably not. So why don't you be a bit more fair? Why don't you not succumb to this psychology of envy and resentment? By the way, when I post something about how much I hate how I've been financially raped by the Quebec and Canadian government, someone will usually come on the Twitter feed and say, "You're such an entitled rich asshole. Why can't you pay more?" So imagine the psychology of such a person who finds that me paying 58% of my income is, by the way, it's not 58%. That's just the income. If you add up all the taxes, now you might say, what are the other taxes? We also have provincial sales tax and federal sales tax in Canada that is 15% of what I spend. So when I've already paid you 58%, the 42% that's left to me, if I now go out and spend, you take 15% of that. But now let's do property tax, let's do carbon tax, let's do school tax. I'm probably left with about 30 cents to the dollar. That's fair? That seems a bit excessive.
Yeah. So obviously very complicated problem. I look at the Gini coefficient,
Yes.
which
Of
says,
inequality.
yeah, so the wider the gap of inequality, the more likely you are to have violence in your society.
Yes.
And so this is one of those, going back to what you and I were saying, you've got to be anchored in reality. You want to look at things through an evolutionary lens. So I know we have to do something. I know that it is the least selfish thing that you could do is to just let people suffer. And so my thing becomes, I don't mind paying taxes. What I mind is not getting good results for my taxes.
Indeed.
And so when you were talking about, in a business, if you're not running the business well, the business goes out of business. That's just that. Like, nobody gives a shit, done. Whereas when the government spends money, they don't set a goal and say, okay, this is what profitability looks like or whatever. Because not everything they're going to do is going to generate money. So it's, okay, what's the social good and how are we going to measure it? And every sin you can possibly imagine is hidden by being vague about those two things.
Exactly.
And so that's where it scares me. But this is an area where I feel like a lot of really smart people have looked at this, and the big debt cycle that Ray Dalio talks about is terrifying and brutal, and yet is the bestest. And when you look back over, I forget how many years he went back through, but it was something like 2000. And then he really looked closely at the last 500 years. And there is a hyper predictable 6 stages of things that happen. And it has all to do with basically a war, a new world order is established, good times happen in the beginning, then you get fat and lazy, and then the bad times set in, you do everything through debt, debt accumulates massively, which anybody paying attention is happening right now in the US. And then things get so bad, the Gini coefficient becomes so wide, there's so much disparity between the haves and have-nots that there's either a revolution or a war. And oftentimes a war, if there's a rising power on the outside, hey, like China, and now all of a sudden there's a hot war, which forces a switch in the New World Order. All the debt is sort of reconfigured as you come out of that, and the whole cycle starts over again.
Yeah.
And it usually lasts something like 150 to 200 years, something like that, these cycles. And it's terrifying and it's brutal if you're in that sort of final moment. And just to give people heart palpitations, Ray Dalio puts us at stage 5.5, somewhere in there.
Yikes.
Yep. And the last time I asked him, which admittedly was 4 or 5 months ago, but he pegged the odds of U.S. Civil War at 40%.
Within what period?
5 years?
Yikes.
Yeah. So
That seems a bit pessimistic.
that is the person who has made the most money off of being right in the history of the United States, telling you.
Who is this?
Ray Dalio.
I'll have
So
to
he's
check
built
this
the
guy out.
largest hedge fund in the world. So a hedge fund is somebody going,
Yeah,
where's the right bet? Not just in the US, but around the world. So
Wow.
literally, there's nobody that has a better proven track record of looking at the actual state of the world, making predictions, putting his money where his mouth is, and reaping the rewards of it over a 35, 40-year career. So this guy, he may still be wrong, and he'll be the first to tell you that, hey, my ultimate thing is diversification, because I know not to trust myself.
Right.
Like, that's Ray Dalio's whole thing. But he also, it's not like he just bets blindly. He doesn't diversify blindly. He says nobody spends more money than me researching history, at looking at how do these cycles work. I could be misquoting, but these numbers will be directionally correct.
Have you had him on your show?
Multiple times.
Okay. very
That
cool.
he has spent something like $100 million studying history to figure out how these loops occur. It's insane.
Amazing.
So anyway, for him to be like, meh, you need to be paying attention. You need to be thinking about this. So I bring all of this up in the context of freedom. I think freedom is incredibly important.
If you like that clip, check out another powerful clip right here, and I'll see you there.